Long before the first true tree ever lifted its branches into the sky, Earth was already green, not in the way we understand forests today, with towering trunks and layered canopies, but in a quieter, stranger way. The land was covered in life that did not yet know how to grow tall, did not yet know how to build wood, and had never formed what we would recognize as a forest. And yet, in this ancient world, something remarkable was beginning to take shape, an early version of forests, built by organisms that would later vanish almost completely from the planet. To understand these forgotten landscapes, it helps to imagine a time when life itself had only just begun to step onto land. For billions of years, Earth's surface was dominated by oceans, where microscopic organisms carried out the slow work of evolution. The atmosphere was different, the continents were barren, and the idea of a forest had not yet been invented by nature. But around 470 million years ago, during the Ordovician period, something changed. Tiny plants, descendants of green algae, began to colonize the edges of land. These early plants were simple. They had no roots as we know them, no leaves, and no vascular systems to transport water efficiently. They clung close to the ground, spreading like thin green films across damp surfaces. Mosses and liverwort-like organisms are thought to resemble these pioneers. They depended on moisture, and without it they could not survive. Yet their presence marked a turning point. For the first time, life was transforming the land itself. Over millions of years, these early plants began to reshape Earth in subtle but powerful ways. They helped break down rock into soil, trapping sediments and stabilizing surfaces that had once been barren and exposed. They also played a role in altering the atmosphere, drawing down carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen through photosynthesis. This gradual transformation set the stage for something much larger. By the time the Silurian period arrived, around 430 million years ago, plants had begun to experiment with new forms. Some developed simple vascular tissues, allowing them to transport water internally. This innovation meant they could grow slightly taller and spread further from constant water sources. Among the earliest known vascular plants was a group that included species like Cooksonia, small and branching, with spore-producing structures at their tips. They were still low to the ground, only a few centimeters tall, but they represented a critical step toward complexity. As plant life continued to evolve, a quiet revolution unfolded. The land, once bare and lifeless, began to host communities of vegetation. These were not forests in the modern sense. There were no towering trunks, no deep shade, no layered ecosystems. Instead, the landscape was covered in dense, low-growing plant life, forming continuous mats and clusters. In some regions, these early plant communities stretched across vast areas, creating what could be considered the first primitive forests. Forest without trees. One of the most fascinating examples of this early world comes from fossils discovered in places like Scotland and Canada, where ancient sedimentary rocks preserve traces of early terrestrial ecosystems. These fossils reveal communities dominated by small vascular plants, along with fungi that formed symbiotic relationships with them. These fungi likely helped plants absorb nutrients from the soil, a partnership that still exists today in modern ecosystems. As the Devonian period began, around 419 million years ago, plant life underwent another transformation. Some species began to grow taller, branching more extensively and developing structures that resembled stems. Among them were plants like Rhynia, which had simple vascular systems and upright growth. Though still modest in size, these plants hinted at a future where height would become a major evolutionary advantage. But even as plants grew taller, true trees had not yet appeared. The landscapes of the early Devonian were still dominated by low to medium-height vegetation. In these environments, sunlight reached the ground easily, and there was little competition for vertical space. The concept of a forest canopy had not yet emerged. Then something unusual appeared, organisms that would dominate these early forests but would later disappear almost entirely. These were not trees, and they were not typical plants. One of the most mysterious among them is Prototaxites, an organism that could grow up to 8 meters tall, towering over the surrounding vegetation. For years, scientists debated what Prototaxites actually was. Early interpretations suggested it might be a type of giant algae or even a primitive tree. However, more recent evidence indicates that it was likely a massive fungus. If this interpretation is correct, then the earliest forests may have been dominated not by trees, but by towering fungal structures rising above carpets of low plants. This creates a picture of ancient Earth that feels almost alien, a landscape where giant fungi cast shadows over primitive vegetation long before the first tree evolved. As the Devonian period progressed, plants continued to evolve new strategies for survival and growth. One of the most important developments was the evolution of roots. True roots allowed plants to anchor themselves more securely in the soil and access water from deeper underground. This innovation opened the door for greater height and structural complexity. Another key development was the evolution of leaves. Early plants had simple leaf-like structures, but over time these became more complex, increasing the surface area available for photosynthesis. This allowed plants to capture more energy from sunlight, supporting larger and more complex forms. By the Middle to Late Devonian, around 390 to 360 million years ago, the first true trees began to appear. Species like Archaeopteris are often considered among the earliest tree-like plants. They had woody trunks, branching structures, and a more advanced vascular system. These plants could grow several meters tall and began to form the first true forests in the modern sense. But before these trees rose to dominance, the world had already experienced millions of years of forest-like ecosystems built by entirely different life forms. These early forests played a crucial role in shaping the planet. They stabilized soils, influenced weathering processes, and contributed to changes in atmospheric composition. Some scientists believe that the spread of early plants during the Devonian period may have contributed to a significant drop in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. This, in turn, could have influenced global climate, potentially leading to cooling events. The relationship between plant evolution and climate is complex, and researchers continue to study how these early ecosystems affected Earth systems. As true trees began to dominate, many of the earlier plant forms declined or disappeared. The rise of taller plants created new environmental conditions. Dense canopies reduced the amount of light reaching the ground, making it harder for low-growing plants to survive. Competition for resources intensified, and ecosystems became more structured and layered. The mysterious prototaxides eventually vanished from the fossil record. The reasons for its disappearance are still debated. Some researchers suggest that changes in atmospheric composition or competition with evolving plants may have played a role. Others propose that shifts in climate or ecological dynamics contributed to its decline. What is clear is that this once dominant organism did not persist into later periods. As forests became more complex, new groups of plants emerged. Lycophytes, horsetails, and ferns began to diversify, forming dense and varied vegetation. These groups would go on to dominate the Carboniferous period, around 359 to 299 million years ago, when vast swampy forests covered large portions of the planet. Many of the coal deposits used today were formed from the remains of these ancient plants. Yet even these later forests were different from those of today. Many of the dominant species have no direct modern equivalents. Giant club mosses like Lepidodendron could reach heights of over 30 meters, with trunks covered in distinctive patterns. These plants reproduced using spores rather than seeds, and their life cycles were closely tied to the moist environments in which they lived. Over time, further evolutionary innovations reshaped plant life. The development of seeds allowed plants to reproduce without relying on water, enabling them to colonize a wider range of environments. This gave rise to seed plants, including the ancestors of modern conifers and flowering plants. But the story of forests before trees is not just about what came after. It is about recognizing that the concept of a forest is not fixed. It is an evolving idea, shaped by the organisms that inhabit it. The earliest forests were not defined by towering trunks or dense canopies, but by communities of life interacting with each other and with the environment in ways that transformed the planet. These ancient ecosystems remind us that the world we know today is only one version of many that have existed. The forests we walk through now, with their familiar trees and layered structures, are the result of hundreds of millions of years of experimentation, adaptation, and change. In those early landscapes, before trees even existed, life was already laying the foundation for everything that would follow. The soil beneath our feet, the air we breathe, and the diversity of plants that surround us all trace their origins back to those first fragile steps onto land. The story of these lost forests is not just a chapter in Earth's history. It is a reminder of how profoundly life can reshape a planet, even in its simplest forms. Long before the rise of towering trees, the quiet work of small, humble plants was already transforming the world, preparing it for the vast and complex ecosystems that would come later. And though those early forests have vanished, their legacy remains, written into the very fabric of the earth itself.